this video is a book review. Here's the book, The British Imagination by Peter Watson, and it's really going to talk about the history of Britain, of England, from the time of the first Queen Elizabeth to the second Queen Elizabeth. So here is Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen. She took the throne in 1588, which is the same year that England fought and defeated the Spanish Armada in a naval battle. Her parents were Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, who, when she's only 3 years old, Henry VIII had Anne Boleyn bumped off. And this also, by the way, I'm half Irish, so I have some historical resentments towards the British. I respect some of their great, tremendous cultural achievements, but I also know what barbarians they are, okay? I know a lot about Britain, okay? And to me, for example, the Anglican Church is a joke right from the beginning. So, this mass murderer scumbag, Henry VIII, is the head of the Anglican Church. Okay? And like a typical Protestant religion, it's totally secularized right from the beginning. You have the secular ruler in charge of the church. No wonder it becomes a corrupt joke. Okay? It's founded on this guy, this evil jerk who's like almost as bad as Nero from the Roman Empire. That's the founding of the Anglican Church, okay? How could you not laugh at that? And Protestantism in general, it just popped up out of the blue after Martin Luther, 1517, and just declared itself the new religion. And it was mostly secular rulers want to control the money purse, and they don't want the tithes to go out to Rome. But anyways, we're going to talk about England, the good and the bad, and I think some of it's going to be pretty interesting. Now here is the more recent, this is Queen Elizabeth. She died when she was 96 years of age in 2022. So from 1588, Elizabeth I, to the death of Elizabeth II was over 400 years. And there's a couple big events. One guy you got to know about is Captain Sir Francis Drake, later Admiral Drake. And he was a great captain of a naval vessel, a boat. But he was also a very cruel guy. One of his assistant leaders disagreed with him, so he just had the guy beheaded, okay? So that's kind of how brutal he was. He sailed around the world in the years 1577 to 1580. So initially, the Spanish had led the way with Christopher Columbus, and even earlier, Amerigo Vespucci for the Italians, sailing long, tremendous distance across oceans. But England then began to dominate the ocean, especially after it crushed the Spanish Armada in 1588. So what you're seeing here also is I'm establishing right from the beginning the dominance of England during this time. They kicked Spain's butt in 1588, Spanish Armada, and we're going to see, here's a painting of Spanish Armada, the British flag and a pseudo-Spanish flag there. And then here's a little thing from the 7 Years' War. The 7 Years' War was England against France, 1756 to 1763. And that was a big victory for England. So England had this tradition from there on out, Admiral Nelson and everything else, of just being dominant from a naval point of view. France was still seen as being culturally dominant. France was seen as being the Athens of Europe after it had sort of taken over that position from Italy and from Rome and from Florence. Okay, but the point I want to make is from around this time, England was the powerhouse of Europe, the empire on which the sun never sets. Okay, and a couple things about this book, what's good, what's bad. What I like about these books is I'm currently working on another book myself related to the history of Europe, and I'm more interested in cultural history than all this political stuff. Political stuff for me is kind of boring. It's always the same. New ruler comes along, builds up the military, says we can kick our neighbor's ass, they're evil, let's kick their butt and steal their stuff. That gets old, okay? But I like all the cultural stuff related to these countries. That's why I've been reading in great detail. I did first Germany, then I'm doing England now, and I'm in the process of doing France. I've already done a lot of these other countries, Poland, Russia, and other ones, okay? USA, art, etc., etc. Okay, so what's good about the book is I like the recent history better. I don't really care too much about a long time ago. It's not as interesting in England. I've already done a whole bunch of videos about King Arthur and chivalry, and I love all the art related to that stuff. So he does a good job, this historian, of putting stuff in order, rough chronology of the great literary, philosophical, artistic, and political heroes of England. Okay, so that's good. What's bad about the book? The guy's an atheist. Peter Watson's an atheist. So he tries to claim, atheists always try to say that being an atheist is intelligent. Is it intelligent to say that life has no meaning and nothing is meaningful? No, it means you suck, okay? They always suck at everything, atheists. How can they put meaning into their work, into their literature, into their music, into their philosophy if they're an atheist? None. And you know who's an atheist? It's always these humanist guys, historians and journalists and writers, because they don't know anything. When you take a serious study of biology and chemistry, anybody who's honest, you believe in God, is just too much. The smartest people that ever lived can barely figure out a little microcosm, a billionth of it. Okay? How did it all happen by accident? It didn't. It's way, way, way too complicated. Okay, and history also shows the smartest people, these scientists, people like Isaac Newton, James Clerk Maxwell, they're devoutly religious, okay? Deep understanding of science makes people religious. And it's obvious to an intelligent person that the sophistication and complexity of plants, animals, and humans has to be designed. There's no way around that once you really have a grasp on it to the extent that we're able. Okay, now here's a big guy we got to talk about briefly. His name is Francis Bacon, so a little bit of a funny name, especially since this is a vegan channel. And he's given credit, sometimes called the father of empiricism, father of empirical science. And he wrote in about 1620 about the importance of moving beyond Aristotle. Aristotle was, in his opinion, overemphasized in the school. And I think there is truth that Aristotle was overemphasized. But to call him the father of empiricism is an exaggeration because empirical methods in science were already being used long before he came along. But he still got made famous for claiming that. And he was a devout Anglican. Here's a quote by Francis Bacon. He says, "The method of acquiring knowledge in the sciences is induction." And by the way, do you know what induction is? Induction means you make observations and say, this seems to be the case, this seems to imply this seems to imply this. Each little piece of inductive logic is leading towards an eventual conclusion. And the two main categories of logic is, there's deductive logic, where you have complete information, like a syllogism, an Aristotelian syllogism. Socrates is a man, all men are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal. That's deductive logic. Inductive logic is more like this. It's more like consilience, a bunch of small observations leading up to a conclusion. Observation number 1 supports our theory. Observation number 2 supports our theory. Observation number 3 supports our theory. Observation number 4 supports our theory. And so does number 5. Therefore, our theory is probably true. That's inductive logic. Okay, so Francis Bacon continues. Proceeding logically from the particulars of experience to make generalizations that are then tested by experiments. Science is dynamic meaning that is always correcting itself. Scientific method is absolutely crucial. The scientific method is the path towards where you want to go. Genius is fleetness of foot. But if you're on the wrong path, genius just goes farther, faster, and away from the truth more quickly. But even a plotter on the right path moves us ever closer towards the truth about God's world. A little philosophy inclineth a man's mind to atheism, but depth in philosophy bringeth a man's mind to religion. Okay. He did do some other stuff that I didn't like. He sort of foolishly thought that science and religion should be largely separate. But anybody who really knows science, you can't separate them. It's like Thomas Aquinas said, there is only one truth. You can certainly say there are things that we don't know. There's tons of things we don't know. There's tons of things we don't fully understand. But there's only one truth, okay? And you need to keep that in mind, because otherwise it becomes a joke. Modern science is so-called atheistic science. And I can tell you, almost all the medical journals are primarily fake, or they're micro questions nobody really cares about. Big business comes in, and then you end up with just fake science. It's paid for. I use the dollar sign for the S in the word science. And then the whole literature becomes just filled with nonsense, as it is now. All the stuff like paleo, keto, carnivore, good fats, all that nonsense, okay? And, Francis Bacon, he rightfully feared that the continued splintering of Protestant sects would eventually lead to atheism. And that's exactly what it's doing. So Christianity right now is in terrible trouble because the Catholic Church has been taken over by homosexual pedophiles that are trying to destroy it. They're the Antichrist. And the Protestant religion itself is just too boring, and people don't really want to listen to somebody, yelling at them every Sunday saying, do as I say or you'll burn in hell. Okay, that's boring. Okay, Catholicism was around for 500 years with paganism. and it has a much greater sense of life and enjoyment and happiness. Yeah, you don't worship the saint, but you pray to them to intercede for you with God, okay? And that's a good thing. Same thing with Mary, the traditional family. That's all good. John Milton here is dictating Paradise Lost to his daughters, painting by Eugene Delacroix. And Milton was described as a singer of Puritanism, or you could say the poet of Puritanism. So he was a Puritan, pain in the butt, but he was a great genius. And Paradise Lost is actually, it is a masterpiece of an epic. It's about the Garden of Eden, the fall of man. There's Adam and Eve, okay? And a lot of people felt that he wrote the part of Satan as more enthusiastically than he did the part of the angels and God. And William Blake would support that notion. And so here I think is a real nice painting. The last one is Jan Bruegel and Peter Paul Rubens from 1615. This one right here is Alexandre Cabanel, French artist, and I think it's great. Expulsion of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. Okay, that's a pretty amazing painting from 1867. And then here's the secret of Paradise Lost. If you want to read it, you got to read it in plain English. This is a great book by Joseph Lanzara. Once I read it, then I understood why people love Paradise Lost. Because Darwin used to love it. He'd bring it with him everywhere, and there are other people who really liked it. And when you read it with plain English, it becomes easy to understand. And it actually is a great book. And that Paradise Lost book, you can blow through it real fast. If you try to read it in the original English, it's tough to read because the way Milton writes, he has a very much of a Latin syntax, lots of passive voice. And Milton's own text is difficult to read. Okay, it's much more difficult to read than Shakespeare. Okay, here's just some different versions of the painting. The Rebuke of Adam and Eve by Domenichino from 1626. Now here's a painting I like from Masaccio, the Italian artist from 1428. What I like about it is, even though the artistic technique is kind of simple, he does a great job of conveying the emotion. There's no ambiguity about what's going on here. This was the old one that had been all dirty and covered with fig leaves. When they cleaned it and they removed the fig leaves, this is what it looked like, okay? All right, now here's another famous early book from Protestant world. This is The Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan. And he's another Puritan pain in the butt, but a lot of people really like this book. It's very much like Dante's Divine Comedy. He starts in the city of destruction, the city of sin, and he basically stumbles his way into better understanding his pilgrim's progress towards the celestial city, getting towards heaven. Just like Dante's Divine Comedy, first of all, had the infernal descent into hell, then ascent up into purgatory, and finally to heaven with Beatrice. Okay, so, Bunyan again is a preachy pain in the butt, Puritan. But the book was super popular. It's had over 13,000 editions. And I saw an animated version of it. I didn't read the actual book because I've read quotes from it, and I just can't find it that exciting. But I do like the idea of an epic of stumbling oneself's way to heaven. And it reminds me like that painting. I just showed it recently in one of my other talks on what makes a painting great was the Tiepolo, the institution, the gift of the rosary, where they zigzag through the painting as you work your way up towards the heaven, and the rosary, praying the rosary helps you to do it. So I think I got another slide. Oh yeah, here's another slide this is Bunyan's map of the Pilgrim's Progress towards paradise. So you start out in the city of destruction, you go through the slough of despondent, and you progressively go through all these man experiences, vanity, etc., and then you finally end up in the celestial city, okay? So that's what Pilgrim's Progress is all about. All right, so we had to get all that introductory stuff out of the way. In the future issues, I'll show you more of the great artists and writers and other stuff, especially cultural history. I think is most interesting. A little bit of other types of history. So anyways, I hope you found that interesting.